the purpose of the inverse function. The inverse function is designed to be the undo button of the original function. It's how you are able to do equation solving. So, for example, if f of x equals the square root of x, its inverse is what? What undoes a square root?
Q.
Square root. Square root. Square. Its inverse is x squared. So that's what enables us to undo what was done. Inverse function. And we see it clearly between square root of x and x squared, right, and square root, because I undo a square by using the square root. So it's the undo button. It undoes what was done, the inverse function. What else the inverse function does is it gives me a round trip ticket so domain to range, range back to domain. Gives me a round trip ticket. Now, in order for that to be true, f of x must be a 1-to-1 function. And when I was at ASU, and I had a bunch of teaching assistants that were working for me over there, this used to be something we'd argue about all the time, and they'd bring this in. And why are you saying that? Because what do I know a function is? A function is 1-to-1, so why am I calling it a 1-to-1 function? Isn't it already 1-to-1? But this has a different meaning. A function, this is 1x to 1y. A 1-to-1 function, and adding 1 to 1 means 1y to 1x. It's the round trip ticket. So if 2 goes to 3, 3 must return to 2. So if 2 goes to 3, 3 must return to 2. You've got to end up where you started out. That's what a 1-to-1 function does.
And that 3 cannot go to any other number.
That 3 cannot go to any other numbers. It is 1-to-1. 1x to 1y, 1y to 1x. It literally is the round trip ticket. No intermediate stops anyplace else. So if I were going back east, I can't decide on my way back that I want to stop in Las Vegas. I go from here to Washington, D.C., Washington, D.C., back. No stops anyplace else. It's literally a round-trip ticket. 1-to-1 function. So we say that, whoops, I'm sorry. Okay, I can't write either. So, f of x must be a 1-to-1 function for it to have an inverse. Which means not all functions have inverses. Not all functions can have inverses. You might be able to define it to have an inverse, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but not all functions have inverses. Now the notation for the inverse function, it's f to the minus 1 of x. This says f inverse of x. F to the minus 1 is not equal to 1 over f. F to the minus 1 is just notation. F of x, the whole thing, to the minus 1 is 1 over f of x. But just having f to the minus 1, that's just notation telling you it is the inverse. And you see it on your calculator. If I look at my calculator face, I see above the sign button, SIN button, SIN minus 1. That's the sine inverse. Cosine, cosine inverse, tangent, tangent inverse. Now above the x squared button, you see his inverse, which is square root of x. And above log, you see his inverse, which is 10 to the x. And above natural log, you see his inverse, which is e to the x. Now, in the calculators that first came out, instead of having a second key, the original scientific calculators, it had an INV key. INV meant inverse. But these things do so much now that you have above the keys things that aren't the inverse. You have letters of the alphabet above the keys. You have menus, like the test menu and the angle menu and the draw menu and the distribution menu above the keys. So those aren't inverses. That just contains menus to give you more capability for your calculator. So they eliminated the INV key. It's now second. And then because you now have more stuff on your calculator, they had to put in another key, and that's what they call alpha, to be able to get the alphas, and everything is alpha. So eventually what they'll do is they'll change that to something else because they have calculators to do more stuff yet. So, and even here, this is green solved. That's not alpha. and here's quotation marks. Well, you might technically say that's alpha, but that's not really a letter of the alphabet. To me, that's not an alpha. So when you come down to it, that changed the world of the calculator, and you no longer had an INV key. But the INV key was strictly, you were pulling off square root, you were pulling off the inverse trigonometric functions, that kind of stuff. That's what the inverse key did. It got to the inverse of that particular function that was on your calculator. And we got much more than that now.